Greetings from Osage. In this video, we'll take a look at two concepts that have come down to us from long ago. Two concepts that have obsessed musicologists and musicians alike, so much so that you have it mentioned by Bharata in the Natya Shastra, and in the year 2017, 6 years ago, scientists, researchers from various institutions, the leading science research institutions, technologists, are trying to understand what these two are actually all about. Svara and Sruti. Now, Natya Shastra mentions both Svara and Sruti. Mentions that there are 22 Shrutis to an octave. What does this actually mean, to say that there are 22 Shrutis in an octave? Does it mean that one octave can be divided in such a way that 22 Shrutis appear in it? Are these Shrutis notes or swaras? The Natya Shastra has an answer. Not all notes are equal as far as Shrutis are concerned. It says that the notes Sa, Ma and Pa have 4 Shrutis each. Whatever it means at this moment, what a Shruti is still remains indeterminate. So we have 4 possible ways in which Sa is expressed, Ma is expressed, and Pa is expressed. You have 3 possible ways, 3 Shrutis, to Re and Bha, and 2 Shrutis, 2 possible ways in which Ga and Ni are uttered, expressed. Abhinava Gupta has a very interesting take on this. Abhinava Gupta lived in the 2 centuries, 11th and 10th and 11th, and he was a philosopher and a polymath, a musician and a musicologist. And it is interesting that in his commentary on the Natya Shastra, he talks about Shrutis as emanating or as a consequence of a musician's trying to tune up her instrument. Now, in the process of tuning, obviously assuming that there is some reference, and this reference is not mentioned either in the Natya Shastra or in any of the commentaries. So we need to understand that when a particular instrument is tuned, it is tuned in a way that the performer feels comfortable. He thinks or she thinks that the tuning is such as it produces the 7 notes, and those 7 notes are produced in a way so as to accommodate the 22 Shrutis. There is a Veena mentioned in both the Natya Shastra and in Abhinava Gupta's commentary, and this Veena is not the Veena that we know of today, but it is a harp. It is a harp which is a bow-like instrument which has 22 strings attached to it, and these 22 strings are tuned. They're tuned in such a way that there is a source Veena and there is a target Veena. So reference as well as a Veena that we tune with reference to the other, which is called the source Veena. Dhruva Veena is the one which we are tuning with respect to a reference Veena. So, what is important from our perspective, today's perspective, is that Abhinavagupta is talking about the materiality of this tuning process. When we tune an instrument, it produces a series of notes. When we tighten or loosen the knob that attaches to a string. And he's talking about those tones that are heard, those microtones that are heard when we tighten or loosen those knobs which are meant to tune up the instrument. So, Abhinavagupta is actually talking about a physical process. Although it is fashionable to talk about metaphysics, we are concerned more with the physical aspects. Now, he does bring in his metaphysics, and let's very briefly discuss what his metaphysics is all about. He says consciousness creates the world. So there is a subject, I, and in becoming aware of the world, I construct it. My consciousness of the world is actually constructing. It's a construct. My world is my construct. So in that there is a separation. And for Abhinavagupta, art, music especially, focuses us, our senses. It brings our consciousness to a focus and brings that focus back to ourselves. So in this process, when the world is out there in my awareness, art helps me to feel a certain oneness with this. But the separation remains. And this is where his idea of Shruti becomes interesting. He says there is a resonance that takes place when the right Shruti is experienced. So when there is a right tuning, you have a resonance. So these points at which the various notes resonate, for example, Sa has 4 Shrutis. So apparently what he's probably referring to is at those 4 points, there is a certain resonance which allows us to hear the Svara Sa as sweet and smooth. These are the terms he uses. Smooth and sweet expression of that Swara. So Swara is finally what we hear. And Shrutis are all these possibilities. So you have a kind of substratum of all these Shrutis. But of course these 22 Shrutis, it is an arbitrary way of dividing an octave. But let us say once it is divided, and in a performance, particular Shrutis of each of these notes, Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Dha Ni, are chosen by the performer. They, if one were to look at Abhinavagupta's interpretation, each of those notes in that particular performance resonates in such a way that the performer and the audience recognize it as such. And in this, the Shrutis become manifest as Swaras. This is the way I look at Abhinava's interpretation of the Bharata's Natya Shastra. So for Bharata, a rasa is something that is induced in the subject, the audience, as well as in the performer. That rasa is produced when the Shrutis are manifest as Swaras. It sounds a little complicated, But let me illustrate it with a piano. On the piano you have, let us say, the 12 notes, starting on one note right up to the octave. Piano is tuned in such a way that each of these notes are equal temperament, in the sense that it is divided into exactly 12 parts. So the frequency goes from, like the octave is exactly double, then you divide that into 12 parts. Now, once you fix these swaras, like in the piano, you have no shrutis, because there is no way in which one pitch or one key or one note can be variated, because it is fixed. Now, if you did not have the kind of division that's already made on a piano, that substratum remains fluid, and you can pick one of the shrutis for sa, ma and pa, one of the shrutis for re and dha, and one of the shrutis for ga and ni from this fluid substratum. And the beauty is that since every performer and every instrument that is tuned varies a little bit in its tuning, because it is not like a piano, there is a relative tuning. A tanpura, for example, it produces one drone, and with reference to that particular pitch, the musician decides to enunciate each of those notes. So there is a freedom with which the performer can use the drone, the reference pitch, to produce her or his shrutis. This is indeed the beauty of Indian music, because it allows the performer the freedom. Of course, the limitation, there is a constraint. It is an aesthetic constraint, and the constraint is that those swaras, for the reasons that have been argued by both Bharata and Abhinavagupta, that the bandwidth, the variation possibilities for certain swaras are more, like 4, than 3 and 2. And these are at the very basis of the aesthetics of Indian music. So swara and shruti, you cannot have shrutis where swaras are fixed, and where the shrutis are fluid, you only have in the swaras that are determined by each instance of their use in performance. So there is a kind of indeterminacy between swara and shruti. And Abhinavagupta actually talks about it, although he's talking about a circularity that is taking place and may not be with the kind of imagination, for example, that Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty allows us today to bring it up in that context, to throw more light on this indeterminacy, the dichotomy between the two. So you can see that there is an imagination, the dichotomy is understood. Sorry, the word dichotomy may not be appropriate here. It is more in the Neti tradition of Indian logic, where it is not this, but then it is not this either. So it is not swara alone, or it is not the shruti alone. They form a dialectical relationship which establishes the kind of intimacy that a performer will be creating, will be establishing with an audience. I like to use the example of pronunciation of a particular language which is not native to the speakers. English, for example, is spoken by people from across the world, and each of those speakers has a native language, and that native language expresses itself in the way the consonants and the vowels are pronounced. But when a speaker from one context, one society, one culture speaks English to a non-native speaker from another culture, a kind of negotiation takes place, and each of those understands one another because the Shrutis are being expressed as those consonants, those swaras, to use the Svara Shruti complex. Now, so this exactly is my way of looking at it, and Abhinavagupta has quite a lot to suggest these possibilities of interpretation, and I think it's a very interesting way of looking at Svara and Shruti. The attempts, for example, of those who want to create a particular instrument where there are 22 Shrutis would definitely be mistaken, because that is not in the spirit of the original dialectic between the two, Svara and Shruti. It's interesting that the book published in 2017, I will be talking about it later on, it is a signal analysis of Hindustani music, and it has some very great minds working on it. They look at the statistical ways in which these swaras, these shrutis, occur in a performance. So in one sense, there is still that fluidity, but when you report a result such as this, then those shrutis become, sort of defined and determinate, thereby in a manner militating against the original spirit of this discussion in Abhinavagupta, and I personally think this to be the case. So this is a little bit complicated, but I think once we pay attention to the analogy of language and pronunciation, non-natives speaking a particular language among themselves, how they negotiate the meanings and the sounds, that might provide a very interesting and a fruitful analogy to understand the Shruti Swara dialectic. So thank you for watching. I do hope this has been useful. We'll have more from Osage in the near future, and please support us on Patreon. We look forward to having you in the next video as well. Thank you and bye.